Hey everyone, if you enjoy my park ranger horror stories, I've started uploading them on Spotify too. My YouTube channel got demonetized, so I'm putting a lot more focus into Spotify now. You'll find daily scary stories there with longer, darker, and more immersive horror content. If you want to support the channel, please go follow the Spotify page and leave a 5-star rating. It genuinely helps me keep making these stories. The Spotify link is in the description and pinned comment. Turn off the lights. Put on your headphones and I'll see you there. My name is Thomas Eugene Garrett, and I've spent 18 years working as a ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains. I know these mountains like most people know their own homes. I grew up here in Sevier County, Tennessee, raised by my grandparents and aunts after my mother died giving birth to me. My father was a ranger too, so this work is in my blood, or at least, that's what I always told myself. By 1992, I was 53 years old. I'd been certified in wilderness medicine, animal behavior, and search and rescue operations. I'd helped rescue 38 people over my career. I had commendations on my office wall, a pension that seemed secure, and a reputation as the most level-headed ranger in the park. I was also divorced twice, estranged from my only daughter, and spending most nights alone on mountains that seemed to understand me better than any person ever had. My assigned territory was the high country around Clingman's Dome, the tallest peak in the park at 6,643 feet. The area included the Forney Creek Drainage and Sugarland Mountain Range. I maintained 2 small ranger stations and knew every trail, every ridge, every hidden valley within my 15,000 acres. I maintained detailed journals documenting wildlife patterns. I could identify animal tracks from 50 feet away. I could read the forest like other people read newspapers. The tower at Clingman's Dome sits right at the peak. In summer, tourists drive up and walk around taking pictures. In winter, maybe a dozen people visit in a month. The area gets fogged in 200 days a year, visibility sometimes dropping to just 20 feet. Temperature inversions make sound behave strangely up there. Wind and fog create strange effects that can fool your eyes and ears. I never believed in Mothman or cryptids or winged creatures. That's West Virginia folklore, and I'd spent half my life debunking that kind of nonsense. We had owls up there, some vultures, occasionally a golden eagle. Nothing else flew at that elevation. Nothing impossible. That's what I believed in October 1992. I was doing routine maintenance at the tower one Saturday morning when I noticed the motion-triggered trail camera had activated. We used them to track animals, mostly deer, sometimes bears. The 35mm film showed something strange, 6 frames over 5 seconds. A massive silhouette on the tower stairs. It looked like a bird maybe, but distorted by the camera angle or damaged film. The silhouette was too large, the proportions too wrong. I assumed it was a technical error, film damage, some weird play of light and shadow. I made a note in my report, filed it as inconclusive, and didn't think much about it at the time. That was my first mistake, assuming the mundane explanation would hold. I knew about the historical reports. Everyone at the park did. William Thornton, a ranger, had filed a report back in 1952 about seeing a massive winged creature near the tower. The report got marked wildlife misidentification and filed away. In 1967, some tourist reported seeing a gargoyle-like thing on the tower. In 1978, 2 hikers vanished near Newfound Gap and turned up 2 weeks later completely disoriented, unable to speak for days. In 1985, the park officially restricted after-hours tower access, claiming structural safety concerns. But I'd investigated the anomalies over my career. I documented 34 sightings in my time at the park, and all of them had explanations. Owls seen from bad angles, weather balloons, misidentified vultures, optical illusions created by fog and fatigue, and the way mountains can play tricks on your mind. This camera footage, I was sure, would have a rational explanation too. I was completely wrong about that. A week after finding the film, I returned to the tower to retrieve the camera and reload it. The October air was cold and crisp that morning, with fog moving through the trees like something alive. I hiked up to the tower, my knees protesting the elevation like they always did. The camera was still mounted where I'd left it, but something caught my eye on the way up. The metal stairs leading up the tower side had deep gouges in them. I mean real gouges, marks that cut into the metal like something sharp had dragged. Across them with force, the marks were fresh. The exposed metal underneath hadn't even started to rust. The pattern was strange too. It looked like something had landed on the stairs, walked down 4 steps, then taken off again. I stared at those marks for a long time. My compass started spinning erratically as I stood there. That happens sometimes. The area has iron deposits, creates magnetic anomalies. My watch, which had been keeping perfect time, was suddenly 3 minutes fast. The temperature at the tower was at least 20 degrees colder than the forest around me, which made sense at that elevation but felt wrong somehow. My radio had heavy static interference, despite being in an area with perfect reception. Logical explanations for everything. That's what I kept telling myself. I developed the film that night in the park's photography lab. I asked Marcus Webb, our superintendent, to come look at it with me. Marcus was a good man, careful, professional, skeptical like me. If anyone would have a reasonable explanation, it would be Marcus. We ran the film through a viewer. Marcus's face changed as soon as he saw the frames. "When was this taken?" he asked. "6 days ago. Early morning motion activation." Marcus said nothing for a long time. Then, "We need to talk to Victoria." Victoria Marsh was our senior ranger, 22 years with the park. Marcus called her to the lab. When she saw those photos, she didn't look surprised. She looked sad, like she'd been waiting for this moment to come. "I'll get the files," she said. Those files were something else. Victoria had been keeping copies of every unusual report filed in the area for the past 20 years. William Thornton's 1952 report, the 1967 tourist accounts, maintenance record showing seasonal damage to the tower, scratches, bent metal, missing rivets, all appearing in October. Missing persons cases from 1978, 1986, 1989, all marked lost in wilderness, all unsolved. "How long have you known?" I asked her. "Since I got assigned here in 1970, Victoria said quietly. "The park has been documenting incidents for 40 years, 47 separate sightings, all categorized as misidentification. The truth is, we don't know what it is, but we know something is here." Over the next week, we set up more cameras, 4 new stations around the tower perimeter. We established observation posts. We interviewed tower maintenance workers, and they all told us the same thing. They see the unusual wear patterns every October, right before the fog rolls in thick. Then came the night of October 12th. I was on watch at the tower at 2:47 in the morning. The fog was so thick I couldn't see my own hand in front of my face. The night was absolutely silent, that deep mountain silence where you can hear your own heartbeat. Then I heard something. At first it was so distant I thought I imagined it. A sound like wind through cloth. But it got louder, closer. The sound of something massive moving through air, wings beating against the fog. Not the quick flap of a bird, something slower, more powerful, each beat generating a low vibration that I felt in my chest. My hands started shaking. I grabbed the spotlight mounted on the tower rail and pointed it into the fog. For 1.3 seconds, I timed it later, measuring from when I hit the button. The light hit something solid. It was hanging in the air about 40 feet from the tower. The creature had a wingspan of at least 18 to 20 feet. Its body stretched 8 feet or more. It wasn't a bird. The wings were membranous, like a bat's wings, but enormous. The body was skeletal and covered in dark scales, not feathers. The head was triangular, avian shape, but with eye placement that suggested intelligence. The same kind of intelligence I see when looking into a dog's eyes or a chimpanzee's eyes. The same kind that meant something in there was thinking, understanding, aware. The creature noticed the light. It noticed me. We looked at each other across that gap of darkness and fog. Its eyes were fixed on mine. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe properly. Then it vocalized. The sound was part scream, part mechanical screech, part something else I didn't have words for. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something expressing itself, communicating something. The sound made my teeth ache and my stomach turn over. I dropped the spotlight. When the light came back up, the creature was gone. My hands shook for 6 hours after that. I vomited twice. My hearing felt muffled, like I'd been in pressurized cabin. But I filed an incident report with Victoria and Marcus documenting everything. In that report, I wrote something I'd never written in 18 years of ranger work. I understand how this sounds. I have no alternative explanation for what I observed. The activity escalated after that night. Over the following week, the creature was spotted 4 more times. One of our maintenance workers, Ross Stevens, encountered it at 3 in the morning while checking the tower exterior. Roy was so terrified his heart went into irregular rhythms. They had to hospitalize him. Doctors couldn't find anything physically wrong, but Roy's heart stayed messed up. He never came back to work. Victoria and I documented the creature's patterns. It appeared every 2 to 3 nights. It circled the tower. It descended to look at windows. It vocalized at irregular intervals, and it was getting bolder. It landed on the tower exterior. It perched on railings. It extended itself into viewing areas like it was testing boundaries. I stopped sleeping. I was on that tower every single night, despite regulations. I was sustained by coffee and fear and something like obsession. I started losing weight. My beard grew in dark and thick. My eyes developed dark circles that made me look like a ghost. I was coming apart, and I knew it, but I couldn't stop. 10 days into the sightings, I decided I needed to find where this creature was coming from. I expanded my patrols beyond the tower area. I searched the surrounding high country systematically. Victoria helped when she could, though she was getting pressure from Marcus to keep this contained and quiet. 3 miles from the main tower, I found it. There was an old firewatch tower from the 1940s, long since abandoned and collapsed. The structure was mostly rotted wood and metal frame, half buried in soil and pine needles. I almost passed it by, but something made me stop and look closer. The interior was a den. It was lined with bones, deer bones, elk bones, what looked like bare remains, scattered and arranged. The smell was ancient and chemical, decay mixed with something else, something that made my throat close up. And then I saw human remains. There were 3 skeletons in there, arranged in the back of the collapsed structure. Clothing fragments, 3 skulls. I photographed everything and called in forensic specialists from outside the park. What they confirmed nearly broke me. The 3 bodies were identified through dental records as Michael Hartman, a 23-year-old hiker who vanished in 1978, Jennifer Morrison, a 31-year-old trail runner who disappeared in 1986, Robert Thornton, a 74-year-old hiker missing since 1989. All had been marked as lost in wilderness cases. All had been officially closed. All had been in the creature's lair for years. I sat with that information for 3 days. 3 people. 3 families who'd never known what happened to their loved ones. And the creature that took them was still out there, still hunting. Victoria had a theory. It doesn't just hunt, she said. It collects. It keeps the bodies. This suggests it has some understanding of possession, territory marking, maybe even prey storage, like it's keeping them. The thought made me feel sick. I made a decision that went against all protocol. I was going to try to communicate with the creature. Not with weapons, not with fear. Just me alone, trying to understand something that shouldn't exist in my rational world. I positioned myself at the tower on October 27th. I called out into the darkness. I know you're there. I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to understand. The creature came. It descended through the fog and landed on a rail about 40 feet from me. It folded its wings, and we faced each other in that space between human and impossible. I felt something happen in my mind. Not in a mental health way. I know what that would feel like. This was different. It was like opening a door to memories that weren't mine. I saw the forest before humans arrived. I saw the creature nesting in cliff caves centuries ago. I saw hunger, survival, the slow accumulation of years and decades and centuries. I saw humans invading the mountain, building, developing, taking territory. I felt ancient understanding that these humans would keep coming, keep hunting, keep making demands on a land that belonged to something older. I collapsed on the tower platform. Victoria found me an hour later, burning with fever, barely conscious. I was admitted to the hospital, and for 3 days I drifted between fever dreams and lucid moments. During those moments, Victoria sat with me and told me things I'd never been told before. The tower was built in the 1920s, she said, but it wasn't built to observe fire, Thomas. It was built to observe the creature, to monitor it. The park has known for decades. This whole region is designated as sensitive wildlife habitat, specifically to restrict human access without revealing why. The creature is native to these mountains. It's older than the park. It's older than the United States. Why tell me now? I asked her. Because you've made contact. Because you're the first person in 40 years to survive it. On October 21st, while I was still in the hospital, 14 hikers were led on an off-trail guided tour through the high country. Someone made a mistake. They came too close to the creature's lair. What happened next was chaos. The creature attacked. Rangers and guides arrived on scene to find the clearing devastated. Vegetation flattened. Blood on stones. Hikers scattered and screaming. 9 people were seriously injured. 5 went missing. Search teams found all 5 missing hikers within 2 hours, wandering confused near the lair. They were alive. They were unhurt. They were empty. That's the only word I have for it. Empty. Their eyes had no focus. They wouldn't respond to pain. They couldn't speak. They were transferred to psychiatric facilities where they remained for years, never recovering full consciousness, never speaking about what happened to them. Rangers had pursued the creature after the attack. They had weapons. They shot at it. The creature was wounded. I saw the blood, but it didn't stop. It simply walked away, like the bullets were minor annoyances. It reached the cliff edge and launched itself into the fog-filled canyon below. Rangers couldn't reach the base. The creature disappeared. The park's response was immediate and absolute. Superintendent Webb made the decision to close Klingman's Dome Tower permanently. The entire region would be restricted to research personnel only. The public access ended. The compromise was put in place, though nobody called it that. While recovering from my fever, I became obsessed with understanding what the creature really was. I spent days in the park archives reading old journals, studying historical documents. I found references in Cherokee legends, stories of Tlanua, a great horned bird creature that predated human presence. I found Appalachian settler accounts from the 1800s mentioning the high thing with wings. I found pre-Civil War documents referring to Devilbird of Klingman's. All pointed to the same conclusion. This creature had been in these mountains for centuries, maybe longer. The fever dreams had given me something else, a theoretical framework. What if this creature wasn't entirely biological? What if it was something connected to the mountain itself? Something that fed on the land's energy, that had achieved a kind of immortality through that connection. The mountain sustained it. The mountain was part of it. I understood then that we weren't dealing with an animal. We were dealing with something intelligent, aware, and as much part of the Smoky Mountains as the rocks and trees. 3 days before my fever broke, I made my decision. I was going to attempt final contact, not to fight, not to run, to understand completely. I checked myself out of the hospital against medical advice. Victoria tried to stop me. Marcus tried to stop me. I didn't listen. On October 28th, I positioned myself at the tower at dusk alone, with no weapons and no communication devices. Victoria watched from a distance with binoculars, unable to help, unable to stop what was about to happen. The sun was setting. The fog was rolling in. The air felt electric, like something was waiting. The creature came. It descended through the fading light, its wings catching the last rays of sun and turning them dark. It landed on the tower railing about 10 feet from me, closer than it had ever come. For the first time, the creature vocalized directly at me. The sound wasn't a scream this time. It was different, structured, intentional. I somehow understood that it was language, not words I could translate into English, but communication with meaning underneath. The creature extended one taloned hand toward me. I reached out and touched it. Contact brought the vision back, but clearer this time, complete. I understood that this creature would never stop hunting. It couldn't. It was what it was, and what it was a predator, an ancient thing, a guardian of something humans didn't understand. But I also understood that it would restrict itself. It would stay away from the established trails, the popular areas, the places where most humans walked. The mountains had enough wild country for both of us. It was a compromise made without words. I withdrew my hand. The creature watched me for another moment, then spread its wings and ascended into the fog. Within seconds, it was gone. I could barely walk down the tower stairs. Victoria met me at the bottom. I could see tears running down her face. "What did it say?" she asked. "It stays," I told her, my voice strange even to my own ears. "We leave this area to it. That's the deal." The Park Service officially closed Klingman's Dome Tower for structural renovation the following Monday. The region was reclassified as restricted research area. Marcus offered me a desk position or a transfer to lower elevation work. I chose the transfer to Cumberland Mountain District. I requested it specifically to get away from those high peaks, though I'm not sure I was completely honest with myself about why. You don't encounter something like that and simply move on. You carry it with you. I never spoke publicly about what happened. The official reports mark it all as wildlife misidentification and inconclusive documentation. No one outside the park knows what really occurred there. Victoria and I maintained correspondence for years, brief letters that confirmed the compact was holding. October came and went. Sightings continued to be documented, but the deaths stopped. The creature kept its part of the agreement. I stayed with the National Park Service until 1997, then took early retirement. I was only 58 years old, but the mountains had taken something out of me that I couldn't get back. I moved to an isolated property in North Carolina, deep in the mountains, where I could live quietly. Over the following years, I maintained a journal. I documented similar sightings in other parks, Shenandoah, Blue Ridge Mountains, others. I began to understand that the creature at Klingman's Dome wasn't unique. There were others like it. Throughout the Appalachian Mountains, in remote areas where humans rarely ventured, these things existed. And everywhere, there were people like Victoria who knew. People who had agreements to keep these creatures' existence quiet. My last journal entry was dated March 2003, 2 months before the heart attack that killed me. I want you to know what it said. I want you to understand what I learned from all of this. For anyone who hears this, the mountains aren't entirely ours. They've never been entirely ours. There are things older than our presence here, things that were in these peaks when the world was younger. If you ever encounter one, don't fight, don't run, don't let fear control you. Understand, that's the only survival that works. The creatures are the real guardians of these mountains. We're just temporary, and maybe that's something we need to accept. The fog still rolls in 200 days a year at Klingman's Dome. The tower still stands, permanently closed, slowly weathering. And in the mountains around it, in the deep places where humans rarely go, the creature is still there. Still watching, still waiting, still keeping its agreement. My name is Will Prescott. I'm a ranger for the National Park Service, and I've been working in these mountains for 15 years. That might not sound like much to most people, but out here in West Virginia, 15 years means you know the land. You know where the trails go, which streams run dry in summer, where the old mining tunnels collapse. You know it better than you know your own house. I grew up in these mountains too, though I spent a long time pretending I didn't. My grandfather was a coal miner. My father was a coal miner. My uncles, my cousins, pretty much every man in my family worked underground, pulling coal from the dark. I was supposed to do the same. It was the family way. I didn't. When I was 22, I left home and joined the Park Service. My father didn't speak to me for 3 years. When he finally did, it was only to say I'd betrayed everything our family stood for. Now, almost 30 years later, I still haven't gone home. I have a dog, Bruno, a German Shepherd, and he's about the only family I need. The park assigned me to Shiloh Ridge in 1980. It's 80 acres of some of the most beautiful and dangerous land in West Virginia. The New River Gorge cuts through it like a scar, dropping 876 feet down to the water below. The ridge itself sits at 200 to 200 feet above the gorge floor, thick with old hardwood forest, oak, hickory, and pine that's been growing for centuries. Below the tree line, if you know where to look, you can find abandoned mining operations from 100 years ago, caves everywhere, deep ravines where the sun barely touches the ground. I chose this place because it was wild, because it was honest. Mountains don't lie to you. They just kill you if you're not paying attention. The ranger station sits 6 miles from the nearest road. In winter, you can get snowed in for weeks. In summer, the gorge gets so hot that the air shimmers like water, and you sweat through 2 shirts just walking a mile. Most rangers don't stay long. It's too isolated, too lonely, too many ways to die. I loved it immediately. For 15 years, I've kept this place safe. I know every trail, every cliff edge, every place where tourists get into trouble. I've done 56 rescue operations and brought every single person out alive. I maintain detailed journals of wildlife patterns, weather, hazards. I can track a person through 5 miles of forest in the dark. I know this land the way monks know scripture, which is why I never believed in the old stories. The Wampus Beast, the shapeshifters, the things locals whispered about around fires. Those were just folklore, ways people explained the things they didn't understand. Someone falls off a cliff in bad weather, must be a ghost. Hiker goes missing, must be a demon. I had rational explanations for everything. I was wrong. The first wrong thing happened on September 17, 1995, a Thursday. I remember because I'd just finished my weekly trail inspection. A graduate student named Sarah Kellerman had gone hiking on Shiloh Trail that afternoon. She was 26, smart, from the University of Pittsburgh, studying forest ecosystems or something like that, alone, which the park discourages but doesn't prevent. By evening, she hadn't checked out at the ranger station. By midnight, I'd called in a search and rescue team. By morning, everything had changed. The search started routinely. Sarah was probably lost or had twisted an ankle. These things happened. We'd find her sheltering somewhere, maybe a little scared, maybe dehydrated, but alive. We didn't find her until the second day. I was moving through a ravine about a quarter mile off the main trail when I spotted something pink caught on a branch. Sarah's backpack. It was just sitting there in the brush, carefully placed. Not torn or scattered like something would be if a person had dropped it running or falling. Placed, arranged, like someone had set it down and walked away. Everything inside was still there. Water bottle, granola bars, her emergency kit. Nothing missing, nothing touched. I should have radioed in right then. Should have called for backup. Instead, I started looking around. That's when I found the tracks. They were in the dirt near the backpack. Footprints, clearly human. Female feet, smaller than a man's. The shoe pattern matched the hiking boots we'd found in Sarah's dorm room. But the pattern of the prints was all wrong. They went in a circle, covering the same ground over and over, around and around the same spot, like someone walking without thought, walking like they were asleep. Then, about 20 feet away, the pattern changed. The human footprints turned into something else, paw prints. Large ones, the kind you'd see from a big dog or a wolf. But we don't have wolves in West Virginia. Not anymore. Maybe 100 years ago, but not now. And then, 15 feet further on, the paw prints changed back to human footprints. I stood there for a long time, staring at the ground. My mind kept trying to make sense of it. Two people, Sarah and someone else who had a dog, but her backpack was right there, and it had never been opened. Why would Sarah leave her backpack unless she was planning to come back? I radioed in and started following the tracks. They led away from the trail, deeper into the ravine. I followed them for 2 miles, watching as they sometimes became human, sometimes became animal, sometimes seemed to blend between the two in ways that didn't make physical sense. My heart was pounding. Every part of my training told me something was very wrong. I found Sarah against a large oak tree, positioned like she was sleeping. Her clothes weren't torn. There was no blood. She was just arranged there, her back against the bark, her arms at her sides. She was soaking wet, completely soaked, like she'd just climbed out of a river. But we hadn't passed any water that deep. Her pulse was weak, but she was alive. I carried her out in my arms, moving as fast as I could without dropping her, and drove her to the hospital in Princeton. The doctors couldn't find anything physically wrong with her. No broken bones, no internal injuries, no poison. Her brain scans showed something unusual, but the doctors couldn't explain what. It was like her neural patterns were firing in ways they'd never seen before. When Sarah woke up, she didn't know what had happened. I remember the trail, she told me, her voice small and confused. I remember hiking. Then I remember she stopped, her eyes getting distant. I remember being something else, something not human. I was seeing things differently. The colors were wrong. The smells were everywhere. Everything was loud, but I wasn't controlling it. I was watching it happen, but I was also the one doing it. Like I was two people in the same body. The doctors said it was a breakdown caused by stress. Dissociation, they called it. But Sarah kept talking about the animal experience with too much detail. She described what it felt like to run on 4 legs, to hunt by smell, to see the world the way a predator sees it. 3 days later, another hiker was found on Shiloh Trail. Margaret Chen was 34. An accountant from Charleston who'd come out for a weekend hike. She reported the same thing. Hours of missing time, memories of being an animal, consciousness split between her human mind and something else, something huge and hungry. When I heard about Margaret, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a coincidence. Something in my territory was hunting. I brought in Patricia Green, the park supervisor, and James Whitehorse, a ranger I'd worked with for 8 years. James was Shawnee. His family had lived in these mountains for hundreds of years before they were pushed out. If anyone would understand what was happening, it would be him. When I showed him the tracks, the pictures I'd taken, the plaster casts I'd made, he went very quiet. He looked at them for a long time, then asked me to walk with him away from the station. My grandfather told me about something, he said, once we were alone in the forest. He made me promise I would never go to certain parts of this gorge. He said something lived there. He said if I ever saw a woman who wasn't quite right, whose face seemed to shift, I should run and not look back. What kind of something? I asked, though part of me already knew. My people call it the Wampus. It's an old story, older than the English stories this land was built on. A woman once spied on sacred ceremonies, saw things she wasn't supposed to see. As punishment, she was transformed into a creature, but not completely, not all at once. The curse turned her into something that could shift between forms. And the hunger, he looked at me, the hunger never stops. She hunts women, she takes them into herself, possesses them, uses their bodies to hunt and kill. That's impossible, I said. You've seen the tracks, James replied. You've talked to the women she took. What's the impossible part? Over the next 2 weeks, things got worse. We increased patrols on Shiloh Trail. 4 rangers rotating shifts, carrying new equipment, motion-activated cameras, better radios. We tried to set traps for a large animal. None of it mattered. The sightings kept happening. Ranger Anna Flores reported seeing a woman in torn clothes on the trail. When Anna approached to help, the woman's face started to change. Anna said it was the worst thing she'd ever seen. A face that was beautiful and horrible at the same time, shifting between human and something predatory. Anna screamed and ran. When I got there 6 minutes later, whatever it was had vanished. Then came the victims who didn't get away. We found the remains of 2 women in a deep ravine, decomposed 6 months or more. Their dental records matched missing hikers from the summer. Women who'd been supposed to be hiking elsewhere. Women no one had thought to look for in our gorge. Between the possessed hikers and the remains, the pattern became clear. Something was hunting and killing women on Shiloh Trail. It appeared as a beautiful woman to lure them. When they got close, it revealed its true form. Something between human and wolf, with wrong anatomy and predatory eyes. Contact with it caused possession. The possessed person would lose consciousness while the creature used their body as a vessel. Some women woke up afterward. Some didn't wake up at all. James and I realized we had to find its lair. We organized an expedition into the gorge itself. Patricia approved it, though she made us promise we were just doing geological survey work. We couldn't let this get out. Couldn't let people know what was really happening. On October 8th, we rappelled down the canyon wall with climbing equipment. It took 8 hours to descend 600 feet into the old-growth forest at the gorge bottom. The air was cold and damp. Vines hung like skeleton fingers. Everything was quiet, too quiet. Even the birds didn't sing. We found the cave system near an abandoned mining operation from the 1800s. The mine had opened the cave, and then nature had sealed it shut. We had to squeeze through a collapsed section of stone to get inside. What we found made me understand why James's grandfather had warned him. The cave was massive, extending back into darkness that our flashlights couldn't reach. And everywhere, on the ground, arranged on stone shelves, stacked in corners, were human bones, skulls, ribs, finger bones, dozens of skeletons, maybe more. Some were old, bleached white by decades. Some were fresher, still with scraps of clothing attached. There was a ranger badge from 1952, the game warden who'd disappeared. Hiking boots from 1974, a watch from one of the recent victims, a college ID from 1987. The remains went back decades, maybe longer. "We need to leave," Patricia whispered. "We need to leave right now and seal this place up." But before we could move, we heard it. A sound like nothing I'd ever heard before. Part scream, part animal vocalization, part the sound of wind through canyons. It echoed through the caves from somewhere deeper inside. Then she emerged from the darkness. At first, she looked like a Native American woman. Long dark hair, beautiful face, wearing fragments of clothes that must have been a century old. She looked somehow familiar to James, though he said he didn't know her. Then, as we watched, her face began to change. Her features stretched and shifted. A snout pushed out where her nose had been. Teeth grew longer and sharper. Her body twisted into something between human and wolf. Four-legged but with arms, with fur that seemed to shift colors in the darkness, with eyes that were aware and intelligent and absolutely predatory. "This is my place," she said in a voice that sounded like dozens of women speaking at once. "These are my tribute, the women who violated the sacred. They become my vessels. The males who trespass become my food." She didn't attack, she didn't need to. Her presence filled the cave like pressure, like the air itself had weight. She was so big, maybe 8 feet tall, maybe more. So wrong, so hungry. James stepped forward. He said in a voice that didn't shake, though I could see him trembling, "My family carries the keeper's responsibility. We made an agreement with the Ancient Ones long ago. We would watch the boundary. We would keep the hunger contained." The creature tilted its massive head. For a moment, something in its face changed, something almost like sadness. "Your grandfather broke the agreement," the Wampus said to James. "He abandoned the keeper's role. The hunting ground expanded. The hunger grew. More died." "I know," James replied. "That's why I'm here, to resume what my grandfather abandoned, to take responsibility." What followed was a negotiation that I couldn't fully understand. James spoke in Cherokee, a language I don't speak. The creature responded in the same tongue, though her voice sounded ancient and pained, like she was remembering something from centuries ago. Patricia and I stood frozen, weapons in hand but utterly useless. What would you even shoot in a situation like this? Hours passed. The creature never moved from where she stood, but her presence never lessened. If anything, the pressure of it grew heavier. I started to understand that this being wasn't just dangerous. It was something fundamental to this place. Like the gorge itself had developed a will and given it a body. Finally, James turned to us. "We have an agreement," he said quietly. "The Wampus will retreat deeper into the gorge. The hunting ground will shrink. The tribe will resume the keeper's role, warning women away, creating barriers, making sure the boundary doesn't expand again. But the creature, she stays. The hunger doesn't end. It just becomes smaller." "You're leaving it alive?" Patricia said. "It's not alive the way we understand alive," James replied. "It's a curse made conscious. You can't kill a curse with bullets. You can only contain it." The creature seemed to acknowledge the decision. She began to transform again, but differently this time. She grew larger. Her form became more abstract, sometimes almost human-shaped, sometimes pure animal, sometimes something that seemed to exist in more dimensions than sight could process. She was beautiful and horrible and tragic, all at once. Then, in a moment that might have been imagination or might have been real, she seemed to rise up and sink into the stone itself, disappearing into the cave wall, like water soaking into earth. The pressure lifted. We climbed out of the gorge in silence. I filed a report with Park Superintendent Davis. It said exactly what he needed to hear. Geological survey confirmed mineral deposits in the gorge sector. Recommend closure of that area due to hazardous conditions and contaminated water. Sources. He approved the closure within 2 days without asking questions. Sometimes officials don't want to know things. The possessed hiker's psychiatric episodes were attributed to environmental stress. The remains in the gorge were identified, and families were notified privately. There was no announcement, no press release. The park simply became quieter, with certain areas closed to visitors and subtle warnings placed in ranger stations about dangerous wildlife activity. I requested transfer to administrative work. Patricia pulled strings to make it happen. Within 2 years, I retired from the National Park Service. James stayed. He took on the keeper role his grandfather abandoned. He still works ranger patrols in the New River Gorge. He discourages solo female hikers. He creates protective barriers at certain trails. He's the boundary between what hunts and what lives. Sometimes, late at night, I think about what we left in that gorge. I think about the wampus. What might have once been a woman, transformed into something else as punishment for something she couldn't take back. I think about how she hunts women, how she possesses them, how she kills, and I think about the strange justice of it all. The women she took, we found their histories. Most had violated something sacred. Most had hurt other women in ways that law couldn't touch. It's hard to explain what that realization does to you. That the thing hunting in the gorge wasn't evil in the way we understand evil. It was punishment. Bitter, hungry, relentless punishment for people who broke something that was supposed to be sacred. I donate money now to women's shelters, to tribal heritage organizations, to search and rescue teams. I'm trying to make something right, though I'm not sure what right looks like after what I've seen. The New River Gorge still draws hikers every season. Most never know that certain trails are closed for their own protection. Most never know about the remains in the cave or the creature that hunts in the darkness. James knows. He watches the boundary. He keeps the agreement. And somewhere in the stone, in the spaces between human and animal, in the places where punishment takes physical form, the wampus waits. The hunger doesn't end, but it stays contained, it stays bounded, it stays behind the line that James keeps. That has to be enough. Because the alternative, trying to kill a curse, trying to destroy the mountain's own justice, would be far worse. Some things in these mountains are older than law, older than mercy, older than humanity itself. We don't understand them. We just learn to live beside them. And we pray we never have to break the agreements our ancestors made. My name is Raymond Douglas Mitchell, but everyone calls me Ray. I'm 51 years old, and I've been a ranger with the National Park Service for 17 years. People usually think that sounds boring, sitting in the woods, checking camping permits, that kind of thing. But my actual job is darker than that. I investigate incidents when nature turns violent. I'm good at my job, really good. I've closed 89 wildlife incident cases, and every single one had an explanation. Bears destroying property explained. Wild dogs attacking livestock explained. Mysterious deaths that looked supernatural, always explained. 100%, that's not bragging, that's just facts. I grew up in Beckley, West Virginia, in coal country. My father left when I was young, and my mother worked double shifts as a nurse just to keep us fed. That taught me something important. The world doesn't care about excuses. You see a problem, you solve it. You don't sit around wondering. You investigate, you gather evidence, and you act. That's how I've lived my whole life. My wife Elena thinks I'm too practical. She teaches history at the high school, and she loves stories, the complicated kind where nothing makes sense, where mystery just hangs in the air. She'd probably read ghost stories before bed if I let her. Me? I prefer facts. My 2 kids, Marcus and Catherine, are adults now, out making their own way. Elena keeps me grounded when I get too focused on work. She's the soft part of our marriage. I'm the part that solves problems. I was assigned to Kanawha State Forest, specifically the Flatwoods District. 7,500 acres of mixed Appalachian forest. Hills, valleys, ravines, deadfall from old logging operations. The ranger station sits at the center, but response times to the outer boundaries can be 30 to 45 minutes. In summer, the place fills with hikers and campers. In winter, it's just us rangers in the trees. I know Flatwoods District inside and out. I know the trails, the creeks, the dangerous spots where people get lost. I know which animals live where, which areas have recent predator activity, where problem bears come through. That knowledge is power in my job. Of course, I was aware of the history. Everyone in West Virginia knows about the Flatwoods Monster. Back in 1952, people reported seeing something impossible in this area. According to the stories, it was tall, 7 or 8 feet, and metallic, like something made of aluminum. It moved wrong. Its eyes glowed. Hundreds of people claimed to see it. The official explanation was a hoax or mass hallucination. That's always the explanation when people describe something that doesn't fit into normal categories. I'd never believed in it. Not for a second. That's 1950s UFO hysteria, nothing more. We have bears, wild dogs, misidentified wildlife. That's all anyone ever sees in these forests. Alien explanations are entertainment, not reality. But I'd always been practical. I'd solved every mystery in my career because I looked at evidence, not stories. That's what I was good at. That's what I trusted. Looking back now, I realize how confident I was, how certain. The kind of certainty that comes from never being truly tested. In April 1996, I got a call at the ranger station. Frank Mercer, who owned property adjacent to our forest boundary, had found dead livestock on his land. 7 sheep, he said, all in a perfect circle. All of them bled completely dry. I remember the call clearly. Frank's voice was shaky, excited in a way that wasn't healthy. "Ray, you need to come out here. This isn't normal. I know animals, and this isn't normal predation." I told him I'd be there within the hour. As I drove out to his property, I was already running through explanations in my head. Maybe a disease had made them bleed out. Maybe wild dogs had attacked them. Maybe there was an industrial accident that had exposed them to something toxic. I was already solving the mystery before I even saw it. That was a mistake. Frank met me at his property gate. He was pale, and his hands were shaking. That should have told me something right there, but I was too focused on the scene to pay attention to warning signs. The 7 sheep lay in a perfect circle in a field about 200 yards from the forest edge, not scattered like predators would leave them, not torn apart the way wild dogs or bears would damage them. They were positioned carefully, almost like they'd been arranged. I walked the perimeter, taking notes. The grass around them was pressed down in a circle. The diameter was about 30 feet. In the exact center of that circle, the grass was burned. Not burned the way fire burns. I know what that looks like. Burned the way something intensely hot had pressed into the earth, or like radiation had scorched it from above. I crouched down next to the nearest sheep. Frank watched from a distance, not wanting to get closer. The animal's wool was matted, and when I examined it more carefully, I saw something that didn't fit any explanation I had. There were no wounds, no bite marks, no tears. The wool was intact, but the animal was completely empty of blood. The only thing that made sense was if someone had drained the animal somehow, using some kind of surgical precision. "I saw something last night," Frank said. His voice wasn't right. There was a quality to it that I'd heard before, from people who'd witnessed something they couldn't process. "I was out here around dusk, checking the fence. I saw movement at the forest edge. At first I thought it was a deer or something, but it wasn't." I stood up and looked at him. "What was it? I don't know." Frank's hands moved as he talked, like his body was trying to communicate what his mouth couldn't. "It was tall, maybe 7 feet, maybe more. It looked metallic, like it was made of metal or something, silver-looking, and it moved wrong. The movement was jerky, like machinery, but also like it was aware, like it was intelligent. Did it make any sound? I was already thinking military helicopter, special equipment, something explainable. There was a sound like machinery, but also like static, like white noise on a radio. And the light, there was light coming from it, not like a flashlight, more like glowing. I listened to him describe this impossible thing with the patience of someone who's heard many impossible stories. I was already formulating my approach. Contact the military, ask about aircraft in the area, contact local universities, ask about research projects. Document everything carefully. What I wasn't doing was taking him seriously. "Stay at your house," I told him. "Lock the doors. I'm going to investigate the forest." I hiked back into Flatwoods District with my equipment, flashlight, radio, camera, notebook, and my service revolver at my hip. The sun was dropping low, but I had enough light to work. I found the point where Frank said he'd seen the thing. The forest edge showed something odd. Vegetation that looked damaged, like it had been exposed to intense heat or something like radiation. The bark on several trees showed burn marks in straight lines. I pulled out my compass to get my bearings, and it went crazy, spinning randomly, refusing to point north. That was strange enough that I noticed it. I checked my watch. The second hand was moving in jerks, not smoothly, and then it stopped entirely. These little things started stacking up. Small wrongnesses that didn't add up to anything I could explain. The tracks started just inside the forest. They were footprints, humanoid-shaped, but the impressions were too deep, suggesting too much weight for the foot size. The stride was too long. Someone 7 feet tall would make strides like that. And the tracks seemed burned into the earth, like extreme pressure or heat had made them. I followed them deeper into the forest. As I walked, I noticed more wrongness. Trees marked with geometric scratches, too precise to be animal claw marks. Vegetation showing heat damage in a 40-foot radius around the trail. The ground becoming harder, like it had been compacted by extreme pressure. And my radio, normally perfectly reliable in this area, was nothing but static. I was alone in the woods, and the forest itself was telling me something was wrong. That's when I heard the sound. It's hard to describe a sound like that. It was mechanical but also organic, like machinery trying to sing. There was a quality to it that made the air feel thick, that made my chest vibrate with subsonic frequencies. It wasn't loud enough to hurt, but it was present everywhere, coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I cleared into a small opening in the forest, and I stopped walking. Something landed in front of me. I can still see it, even now, even after all these years. It was 8 feet tall, maybe more. The shape was humanoid, 2 legs, 2 arms, a head, but nothing about it looked right. The surface was metallic or crystalline, like its skin was made of some material that shouldn't exist. Light reflected off it in ways that hurt to look at directly, angles that didn't match the angle of the sun. Its limbs were too jointed. When it moved, they bent in ways that biological limbs can't bend. The movements were precise but alien, like something was operating the body by remote control. Where it touched the ground, the earth burned. Actual burning, the grass blackened and curled up as if exposed to flame. But the eyes are what I still see in dreams. They glowed with pale blue light, and they were intelligent. This thing wasn't some wild animal. It was looking at me the way I'd look at something I was trying to understand, with curiosity, with intent. We stood maybe 20 feet apart. I had my hand on my revolver, but I knew, intellectually, I knew that a .38 caliber handgun wasn't going to matter here. This thing operated on a level I didn't understand. Physics seemed different around it. It made that sound again. The mechanical, singing sound that vibrated through my chest and made thinking difficult. And I understood something. That was communication. That thing was trying to talk to me. I did something stupid. I moved my hand away from my gun. I held my hands open, non-threatening. Some primitive part of my brain, some part that still respected hierarchy and intelligence, even if that intelligence wasn't human, understood that I was in the presence of something that considered me beneath threat. The creature extended what might have been an arm. The appendage was too long, jointed at impossible angles, and the tips were crystalline, sharp-looking. It reached towards me slowly. I could have run. Every part of me was screaming to run. I didn't run. The tips of those crystalline structures touched my shoulder. And then I was falling. Not falling through space, but falling through understanding. Falling into a consciousness that wasn't mine. I was seeing through the creature's eyes, but not just seeing, experiencing. I felt its knowledge, its certainty, its absolute confidence in what it was doing. I saw images, stars, ships moving between stars, this planet being visited repeatedly, century after century, the same creatures returning again and again. I understood their purpose. They were collecting samples, observing, cataloging, taking genetic material from everything on this world, building an archive. I understood that humanity was just one more species in that archive, and we were below their concern, not evil enough to exterminate, not important enough to care about, just documented, just filed away. I understood that there were others of these things, elsewhere, doing the same to other civilizations. That this was the function of existence, to observe, to catalog, to move on. And I understood that they would keep coming, forever, if needed, because that's what they did. Then it was gone. I was on the ground, gasping, my shoulder burning where the creature had touched me. The thing was moving away, back deeper into the forest, and I was running. Not thinking, not planning, just adrenaline and instinct. I crashed through trees, tore through brush, my lungs burning, until I reached the road. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I drove to the ranger station without conscious thought. The next thing I remember clearly is Thompson, my district manager, finding me in the break room, soaking wet with sweat, unable to form complete sentences. I was medically evaluated. The doctors found no physical injury, but my neurological system was screaming. I had temporary paralysis in my hands and feet. My vision was affected. I couldn't see the color blue for 3 days. The psychological evaluation showed severe trauma, anxiety, dissociation, PTSD indicators. The doctors wanted to prescribe heavy medication and recommend medical leave. Thompson's listened to my full report in his office, without interruption. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "You're not the first," he finally said. "The ranger before you had an encounter. Different circumstances, but the same kind of thing." His career ended 18 months later. Not because of trauma, because of what he learned. "What do you mean?" My voice was hoarse from screaming in the car. "There are things in these mountains," Thompson said slowly, "that we don't understand, and some decisions about how to handle them are made above my level. All I can tell you is that you're not crazy, and you're not alone." 2 days later, another incident. Different property owner, different location, but identical scene. Cattle drained of blood, positioned in a perfect circle, surrounded by burned grass in a geometric pattern. This property owner had seen the thing too. Same description. Same impossible creature. I made a decision that probably wasn't healthy. Despite the psychological state I was in, despite the recommendation for leave, I returned to investigative work. I started researching. I pulled old files, police records, ranger reports, newspaper archives. I found a pattern. The 1952 Flatwoods incident wasn't a hoax or mass hallucination. Over 200 witnesses reported seeing the same thing, using the same descriptions, across an area of several square miles. The consistency was impossible to fake. What was faked was the explanation. I found other incidents, 1978. Livestock deaths, similar pattern, dismissed as wild dogs. 1987, more kills, more sightings, officially blamed on unknown predators. Even further back, 1963, 1945, 1933. The pattern went back decades. Approximately every 8 to 10 years it happened. The visits increased in frequency over time, and the incidents clustered in specific geographic areas. Always around Flatwoods, always in the same valleys and ridges. I showed Elena what I'd found. My wife, who loves mysteries and stories, sat in our living room with files and newspaper clippings spread across the coffee table. She went pale. "There's something else," she said. She'd been researching old Cherokee stories, Appalachian folklore, anything that might connect. The description of this thing, it appears in stories going back centuries. The visitor from beyond stars, the one that observes and takes. Different names, but the same creature. Your grandfather's grandfather might have seen it. That's when I understood. This wasn't new. This wasn't even rare. This was systematic, regular, scheduled. On April 14th, I positioned myself in the forest where I believed the creature would return. I was armed, I was prepared, and I was alone. Every protocol said not to do this. Every instinct said not to do this. I did it anyway. The creature appeared just after sunset. It emerged from the deeper forest the way it had before, landing more than walking, its movements jerky and mechanical. When it saw me, it stopped. This time I didn't run. I spoke. "What are you?" My voice was steadier than I expected. "What do you want here?" The creature approached, those glowing eyes fixed on me. And then the sound, that mechanical singing, filled the forest. I understood everything. The creature was showing me its knowledge, its certainty. I perceived the universe through its eyes, a vast library of life forms, cataloged and observed by beings like itself. My planet was being documented for their archive. Humanity was being recorded. Our DNA, our behaviors, our genetic potential. The creature had no hatred for humans. It had no respect either. We were specimens, nothing more. The visits would continue forever. The sampling would continue. And there was nothing humanity could do about it. Because humanity didn't even know it was happening. Because when humans tried to speak about it, they were dismissed as crazy. The creature released me, and I fell to my knees. It walked past me, deeper into the forest, and disappeared into the darkness. I took medical leave for 6 months. Elena stayed by my side. I saw a therapist who didn't understand what I'd really experienced, but who helped me function anyway. I took medication that numbed the edges of the terror enough that I could sleep. Thompson gave me a choice, without saying it directly. Most people, after encounters like this, tried to deny it, tried to convince themselves it wasn't real. That usually worked for about 5 years. Then the psychological pressure exploded into a full breakdown. The other option was acceptance, to acknowledge that the world was different than we believed, and to find peace in that knowledge. Acceptance was harder, but it was sustainable. I came back to work 6 months later, changed. I transferred into a research-focused role. I became the liaison between the Ranger Field Operations and the Special Division, the classified branch of the National Park Service that handles incidents like this. Incidents that can't be explained, that don't fit into normal categories. I learned I wasn't alone. There was an informal network of rangers, scientists, and others who'd had encounters. We shared information. We documented patterns. We tried to understand what was being done to us. Not with hate, but with the same curiosity the creatures showed toward us. The network grew. Every few years, someone would have an encounter in the mountains, and they'd be brought into our circle. We'd help them understand that they weren't crazy, that the world really was being visited by something other. When Thompson retired, I stepped into his role, unofficially managing incidents, coordinating response, helping rangers process what they'd seen. I became the institutional memory keeper, the person who understood the pattern and could explain it to others. Elena learned the truth gradually. At first, she was scared for me. Eventually, she accepted it the way I had. She became my emotional anchor, reminding me that even though we lived under the shadow of this knowledge, there was still meaning in human life, in human connection, in the small things that mattered. We set up informal monitoring systems throughout the jurisdiction. We documented incidents, maintained records, shared information with other rangers doing the same work in other regions. The network was never official. It couldn't be, but it was effective. I worked as a ranger until 2007. 30 years of service, 17 of them knowing the truth about what visited our mountains. I mentored younger rangers who faced unexplainable incidents, helping them accept reality rather than deny it. I wrote an unpublished manuscript documenting various encounters and their patterns. I kept it hidden, not because I was afraid anyone would read it, but because most people aren't ready for that kind of knowledge. Now I live quietly in West Virginia. Elena and I have peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from not knowing, but the kind that comes from accepting things as they are, rather than as we wish them to be. The creatures still come. Approximately every 8 to 10 years, there's an incident in Flatwoods or the surrounding valleys. Livestock dies. Someone sees something impossible. The pattern continues. I've accepted that this is reality. The mountains are visited by something other. That's terrifying until it becomes simply true. And once it's true, you realize that the most important thing isn't what they're doing to us. It's what we do with the knowledge that we're being observed. My name is Dr. Daniel Robert Ashford, but everyone calls me Dan. I'm 55 years old, and I've spent the last 13 years as a ranger for the National Park Service. Before that, I was a geology professor, worked in a university, taught classes, published research papers. I have a PhD in cave formations from the University of Kentucky. My dissertation was 300 pages about how limestone dissolves and creates underground passages. I know caves, or at least I thought I did. The reason I left teaching was my daughter Sarah. She was 9 years old when her asthma got really bad. The kind where she'd wake up at night, struggling to breathe, the kind that scared us all. Our insurance from the university wasn't great. The medical bills kept piling up. My wife, Claire, worked as a nurse, but we were drowning. The National Park Service offered better insurance, better salary. So I took the job at Mammoth Cave in Kentucky, 2 hours from where we'd lived, away from the university and the research I loved. But Sarah needed those medical bills paid, and she needed parents who weren't constantly stressed about money. I don't regret it. Not that part anyway. Mammoth Cave isn't just any cave. It's the longest cave system in the world, over 405 miles of surveyed passages. Most people don't understand what that means. It means you could drive for 6.5 hours in a straight line and not cover distance of the cave's known passages, and no one knows how much more exists beyond what's been surveyed. The cave descends 400 feet below the surface in some places. There are underground rivers, underground lakes, chambers so big you could fit a football stadium inside them. The temperature stays constant at 54 degrees year-round, winter and summer. When I started working there, I thought it was perfect. I could be a scientist and a provider. The cave was my laboratory. Every day I went to work, I was doing research, managing cave tours, documenting geological changes. I led a team of rangers who gave tours to thousands of visitors every year. We maintained the passages, monitored the cave's health, and collected data about the rock formations. My specialty was a section called Frozen Niagara, a beautiful part of the cave with stalactites that look like frozen waterfalls. But my actual responsibility included managing some of the deepest, least explored sections of Mammoth Cave. I had access to areas that tourists never saw, areas where cave explorers had to be careful, where mistakes could be serious. Sarah loved the cave. As she got older, her asthma got better, and she became interested in what I did. She wanted to study cave biology, the strange life forms that lived in the darkness. Blind fish, salamanders that had no eyes, insects that had evolved for thousands of years without ever seeing sunlight. At 19 years old, she was a college student studying biology, and she wanted to eventually work with me, cataloging the cave's underground ecosystem. I believed I understood everything about Mammoth Cave. I had published peer-reviewed papers. I knew the documented passages. I knew what creatures lived here. All of them were cataloged in scientific literature. I was confident that anything large enough to hurt someone would already be known. A 400-mile cave system had been explored by thousands of people over 2 centuries. If something big lived in those passages, we would know. I was wrong. I was completely dangerously wrong. The trip was scheduled for September 7, 1997. It was a research expedition, not a tourist tour. Dr. Lisa Cordova was leading it, a cave biologist I'd worked with for 3 years. She was brilliant. She had published more research papers than I had, despite being 7 years younger. The team included James Wheeler, a graduate student, Michael Torres, a photographer documenting cave formations, Sarah, my daughter, and Bobby Kessler, our most experienced senior guide. 5 people, all trained, all equipped. I wasn't going with them. I had a separate documentation project that day in the main passages, photographing geological formations in the main chamber for a research paper I was writing. I was only a walkie-talkie away, but I wasn't actually with them. They were going into a newly discovered passage system, an extension of what we called the Cherokee Avenue section. Explorers had found an opening just 2 weeks before that led to what looked like unexplored territory. This was exciting stuff. New passages meant new formations to study, potentially new species to discover. The team was going to map it, collect samples, and document everything. I watched them leave around 8 a.m. Sarah was excited, practically bouncing. She had her surveying equipment, her collection bags, her camera. She hugged me. "We'll radio in every 30 minutes, she said. "Standard protocol. Be careful down there." I told her. I said it the same way I did every time. It was routine, a parent's automatic warning. At 9:30 a.m., Lisa radioed. "Base, this is Expedition Team. We've successfully entered the passage system. The opening is wider than we expected. We're beginning our initial survey." "Copy that," I said back. "Stay safe." At 10 a.m., James checked in. Temperature is holding at 54 degrees. No unusual water activity. We're progressing deeper. At 10:30 a.m., Michael called. "Found some nice formations here. Getting photos." It all sounded normal. Routine. Safe. At 11 a.m., there was nothing. No radio check-in. I waited 5 minutes and tried to raise them. "Expedition Team, this is base. Radio check." Nothing. I waited another 5 minutes. Tried again. "Cherokee Avenue Expedition, this is Dan. Radio check. Come in." Still nothing. At 11:20 a.m., I knew something was wrong. Equipment failures happen sometimes, but not with 5 people carrying multiple radios. I called for a secondary team to suit up and head to the passage entrance. I headed down myself, moving fast. When we reached the chamber entrance, the passage that led into the newly discovered system, my stomach dropped. The team's equipment was arranged right there at the entrance. Backpacks, safety gear, cameras. It was all stacked neatly, like someone had arranged it deliberately. But the team itself was gone. "Maybe they set up a camp down there," one of my rangers suggested. "Maybe the radios don't work deeper in." It was possible. Caves were weird about radio signals, but the way the equipment was arranged, it didn't look like people had just left it there while going deeper. It looked like someone or something had collected it. I'm a scientist. I need evidence, so I investigated. The new passage chamber was about 600 feet long, bigger than I expected. But as I scanned it with my flashlight, my skin started crawling. The walls looked strange. They had marks on them, long, deliberate marks. Not natural cave formations. These looked like something had scraped the walls intentionally, widening them, smoothing them. The passage wasn't natural. Someone or something had shaped it. My ranger, Derek, saw my face. "What is it, Dan?" "These walls," I said. "Look at them. Really look." He ran his hand along the stone. I've never seen that before. The marks were too regular, too intentional. Natural water erosion doesn't do that. Wind doesn't do that. But a tool would, claws would, something deliberate would. Deeper in the chamber, I found carved markings on the walls. Not English, not any language I recognized. Long, vertical scratches that looked deliberate. Some of them were arranged almost like writing. My heart was pounding. I wasn't a scientist anymore. I was a terrified father looking for his daughter. "Dan, you need to see this," Derek called from the back of the chamber. I found him standing at the entrance to an antechamber. On the floor, arranged in a perfect circle, were bones. Human bones. I could tell immediately. I could also tell they were old. Some of them very old. But mixed with the old bones were newer ones. And among the newer ones, I found Lisa's watch, James's hiking boot, Sarah's college ring. I sat down. Right there on the cold cave floor, I sat down and started shaking. They were dead. That was clear. But how? And why were they here, deep in an undocumented passage? I documented everything with the cold precision of a scientist, even though my daughter's ring was on the ground in front of me. Bones showed evidence of predation. Not small predation. The teeth marks were enormous. The bone breaks suggested something with incredible bite force had crushed them. Some of the bones showed claw marks. But what creature? We knew every predator in Kentucky. There were no big cats here. No bears could get this deep underground. What was I looking at? I made a terrible decision. Against every safety protocol, I ventured deeper into the passage system alone. My rangers told me to wait, to let me bring more people, but I wasn't listening anymore. Sarah was dead somewhere in this cave. I needed to understand why. The passage descended. It got narrower, then wider. My flashlight beam kept bouncing off walls that shouldn't exist, off marks that weren't natural, off evidence of something living down here that didn't make sense. The passage widened into a larger chamber. Bones covered the floor here, too. Deer bones, bear bones, rodent skeletons. Everything was arranged somehow, organized by type, placed deliberately. It looked like trophies, like a collection. That's when I heard it. A sound that came through the stone like the cave itself was moaning. A deep, resonant sound that made my chest vibrate. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard. It was too big, too intelligent. The sound echoed through the passages like something ancient was waking up. The air felt different, heavier. The temperature dropped so fast, my breath started showing in my flashlight beam. Then I saw movement in the darkness ahead. My flashlight found it. A shape, a figure, tall, humanoid but completely wrong. It was covered in something that looked like scales or hardened skin. It was moving with an unsettling grace, too smooth, too fluid, not like any animal, not like anything biological I understood. The eyes reflected my flashlight. They glowed with a pale, sickly luminescence, like the eyes of deep-sea creatures brought to the surface. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't respond. The thing looked at me, actually looked at me, with intelligence, with awareness, with something that might have been curiosity. Then it moved deeper into the darkness and vanished. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't use good judgment. I ran like an animal with a predator on its tail. I scrambled up passages, squeezed through tight places, fell twice and got back up. Behind me I could hear movement, following, not attacking, but following, herding me toward the entrance. I burst out of the cave passage like the ground was on fire. The sunlight hit me, and I collapsed on the rocks, gasping and shaking uncontrollably. They found me semi-conscious and hypothermic. The hospital kept me for 3 days. The doctors said I was in shock. Severe psychological trauma. They wanted to keep me longer, but I refused. I had to tell someone what I'd seen. I had to explain what was down there. The park superintendent was named Walter Tompkinson. He was a big man with gray hair and a quiet way of speaking. I expected him to think I was insane. Instead, he listened to everything, asked careful questions, and then he told me something that changed everything. "This isn't the first time," he said. We were in his office, door closed. "What?" I didn't understand. "Disappearances in Mammoth Cave. We've had 3 in the last 20 years. All in deep passages. All in areas that were supposed to be closed to the public. We keep it quiet because Mammoth Cave brings in 2 million visitors a year. The county depends on that tourism." "You knew?" I felt betrayed and furious. "You knew something was killing people and you didn't." "We didn't know what it was," Thompson interrupted quietly. "We still don't know what it is. We know people have disappeared. We know some of them have left bones behind. We know that sealing passages doesn't always stop it. And we know that making this public would destroy this park and hurt hundreds of families who depend on tourism money. My daughter is dead because you covered this up. Your daughter died because she went into the deepest passages of the oldest cave system in North America. And something down there didn't want intruders," Thompson said, and his voice was hard now. "I'm sorry about that, truly. But yes, we're going to keep this covered up, and you're going to help us." I wanted to hit him. I wanted to scream, but I was too broken. Instead, I listened. Thompson told me about the creature, or creatures. They weren't sure how many existed. The evidence suggested something had lived in the deep passages for centuries, maybe longer. The Native Americans in Kentucky had legends about things in the stone chambers. The Spanish explorers in the 1600s had mentioned encounters. A cave guide in 1812 documented something in the deep places. It's intelligent, Thompson said. It organizes its territory, it hunts, and it seems to understand that there are boundaries. It doesn't hunt tourists in the main passages. Only independent explorers who go deep. It's a guardian, I said. I didn't know why I said it. It just felt true. Maybe, Thompson said. It's keeping people out of the deepest places. Whether that's intentional or just coincidence, I don't know. The National Park Service covered everything up beautifully. The team was declared lost in the deep passages. Search and recovery operations were conducted. Without me present, they said for my mental health. Remains were recovered and cremated as a group. Cause of death was listed as cave-related accident. The new chamber was officially sealed due to geological instability and cave-in risk. I was supposed to return to normal ranger work, but I couldn't. So Thompson gave me a new job, research coordinator. I would work with select scientists to study the deep passages, not to hunt the creature, to understand it, to learn how to coexist with it. Over the next 7 years, I coordinated research that nobody outside the park knew about. We documented the creature carefully. We determined it was likely a single species, adapted to underground living over thousands of years. Pale skin from no sunlight, eyes that saw in near total darkness. Sensory capabilities we didn't fully understand. Intelligence comparable to or exceeding human intelligence. We never captured it. We never harmed it. We just watched from a distance and documented what we could. I published papers about Keiko's reservation. Vague papers, full of careful language, but anyone who read between the lines could see references to unusual findings. My colleagues thought I was obsessed with cave protection. They didn't know why. I established a scholarship in Sarah's name, the Sarah Ashford Scholarship for Young Speleologists. Every year, promising young cave researchers would get funding to study underground systems. It was my way of making sure her passion for cave science continued in the world. I retired in 2004. I was 56 years old. The National Park Service gave me a quiet ceremony with a plaque thanking me for my service. Nobody mentioned the real research I'd done. Now I'm 78. I live quietly, I write occasionally, and sometimes young rangers call me with questions about the deep passages. What should we know, they ask. What does the research tell us? I always give them the same answer. The cave is alive. It has its own consciousness. There are places we're not supposed to go. The creatures that live in the deepest passages aren't evil. They're guardians. They're keeping us safe from ourselves. Nobody knows exactly what's down in the depths of Mammoth Cave. We've mapped 405 miles of passages, but there could be 300 more that nobody has found. And somewhere in those unexplored sections, in chambers we'll never see, something is living, something intelligent, something that understands what we are and why we should be afraid. Sometimes tourists ask me, are there monsters in Mammoth Cave? I always smile and say, no, there are no monsters here. But what I mean is, there are things down there that are much worse than monsters. They're ancient, they're real, and they're very, very territorial. The cave keeps its secrets, and in exchange, it keeps us alive. My name is Samuel Everett Holbrook. Most people call me Sam. I'm 48 years old, and I've spent the last 14 years working as a ranger for the National Park Service. Before that, I spent 30 years working with horses on family land in Grayson County, Virginia. I tell you this because you need to understand what I am and what I'm not. I'm not the kind of person who sees things that aren't there. I'm not imaginative or prone to panic. I'm the kind of guy who looks at a problem, figures out what's causing it, and fixes it. When other rangers see an unusual track, they call me. When something dies under mysterious circumstances, I'm the one they ask to investigate. In my 14 years, I've identified predators in 28 livestock attacks without a single mistake. I understand animals the way most people understand their own families. I can read a horse's mood from the position of its ears. I can watch a dog's gait and tell you if it's healthy or sick. I know predators, how they hunt, what they're looking for, how they think. This background matters because it explains why I was so confident when I first noticed something was wrong in Grayson Highlands State Park. The park sits in the mountains of southwestern Virginia, near Mount Rogers. My job was managing the wild horse herd that lived there, about 200 of them, beautiful animals that had been living free in those high meadows for generations. The park covered thousands of acres of rolling terrain, deep ravines and open grassland. It was isolated work, especially in winter when snow piled up and we were cut off from the main road. In June 1994, I was doing routine checks on the herd. I'd ride out at least 3 times a week. checking on the animal's health, making sure they had good grazing areas, watching for signs of disease or injury. That's when I noticed the nervousness. The lead mares, the older females that the herd follows, were clustering together tighter than usual. The younger horses wouldn't venture into the north section of their grazing range. They'd approach that area, then turn back. I'd see them glance toward those meadows with something like fear in their eyes. A prey animal like a horse doesn't act scared without reason. Something was making them anxious. Then I found the first dead mare. She was lying in the eastern meadow, about 2 miles from the ranger station. At first, I thought maybe she'd gotten sick, but when I got closer, I could see the wounds. Deep puncture marks on her hindquarters and back leg. The tissue around the wounds was torn and bruised. Something had attacked her. Something with teeth large enough to puncture through hide and muscle. The second mare was found 2 days later. Same injuries. The third dead mare was in the north meadow, the one the herd had been avoiding. I called in the deaths to Park Superintendent Linda Martinez. She'd been there 17 years, longer than me. Linda was sharp, no nonsense. She took the reports seriously and approved me to investigate what kind of predator we were dealing with. That's when the wrongness started to reveal itself. The tracks I found were large. Too large. I'm used to mountain lion prints. They're about 3 inches across. The prints I found near the dead horses were at least 5 inches across, with claw marks spread wider than any natural predator I'd ever seen. The stride length was massive, suggesting an animal standing 3 feet or more at the shoulder. No mountain lion gets that big. No wild dog I'd ever heard of either. When I examined the hair caught on nearby branches, it was black and coarse, longer than any canine hair I'd ever seen. The vegetation around where the kills happened showed something strange too. The grass was beaten down as if something incredibly heavy had passed through. But worse, some of the plants looked scorched or withered for no reason I could identify. There was no frost that night, no chemical burns, just dead plants scattered in the tracking area like something had drained the life out of them. I contacted state wildlife officials. I described what I'd found, the massive tracks, the killing pattern, the strange condition of the vegetation. They said it sounded like an escaped exotic animal, maybe from a private collection. But nobody reported any missing exotic dogs in the region. No zoos had problems. Nothing. All the rational explanations didn't fit. But I kept trying anyway, because the alternative was accepting something that didn't make sense. And I've spent my whole life around things that do make sense. On the night of June 15th, I decided to stake out the herd myself. I wanted to see what was actually hunting them. I set up a blind near where I'd found the last dead mare, a spot overlooking a large meadow where the horses came to graze at dusk. I brought a flashlight, binoculars, and a rifle I wasn't sure I'd be brave enough to use. The night was clear and cold. The stars were bright. The horses came out around sunset and started grazing. Everything seemed normal, peaceful. I started to wonder if maybe the killings had stopped, if the predator had moved on to other territory. Then, around 11 o'clock, the horses reacted. They didn't just get nervous, they panicked. All at once, the entire herd turned and started running. Mares were kicking, foals were screaming. The ground was literally shaking from their weight. I'd never seen horses that terrified. Something had triggered pure primal fear in them. I turned toward the direction they'd fled from and shined my flashlight into the meadow. For just a moment, maybe 2 or 3 seconds, I saw it. A massive shape moved through the grass, darker than the night around it, like the darkness had form and substance. My flashlight caught its eyes. They glowed pale gold, reflecting the light like any animal's eyes would. But the intelligence behind them was what struck me. This wasn't just a predator. This was something that knew it was being watched, something that understood. The creature was enormous. Its shoulder height was at least 4 feet, maybe more. The body was lean but powerfully muscled, covered in black fur that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its movement was graceful but wrong somehow. Too smooth, too coordinated, like it was moving with a kind of intelligence that natural animals don't possess. Then it looked at me, actually looked at me, made eye contact. What happened next is hard to describe in words that make sense. The fear that hit me wasn't regular fear. It wasn't like being startled or seeing something dangerous. It was primal, ancient. It felt like every part of my brain was screaming at me to run, to hide, to make myself invisible. My heart started pounding so hard I thought it might burst. My hands shook. I couldn't breathe properly. The creature made a sound, a deep bark that was wrong in its harmonics. It wasn't a natural dog sound. There were frequencies in that bark that felt like they vibrated through my chest, through my bones, through my entire body. My hands went numb. All I could do was stare. For a long moment, we just looked at each other across the meadow. The creature was still. I was frozen. Neither of us moved, then it turned away. It walked deeper into the darkness of the meadow, and within seconds it was gone. Simply gone. I couldn't see it anymore. Couldn't hear it. It was as if the darkness had swallowed it whole. I didn't move until dawn. I sat in that blind, shaking, with my flashlight dead and my mind trying to process what I'd seen. The battery in that flashlight was brand new. I'd put it in just hours before. But when I checked it in the morning light, the battery was completely drained. The temperature where I'd been sitting had dropped so low that frost formed on my jacket and boots, even though the rest of the meadow showed no frost at all. When I got back to the ranger station, my hands were still shaking. Linda was there. She'd called in to check on me after hearing about the herd's panic. She took one look at my face and knew something had happened. I told her everything, the size of the creature, the eyes, the sound, the way my equipment had failed, the impossible cold. Linda listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she closed her office door and told me something that changed everything. "You've seen the black shuck," she said simply. I thought she was joking, but she wasn't. She pulled out a file, an old manila folder with papers that looked like they'd been filed away for years. Inside were official Park Service reports from 1967. A ranger named Patterson had filed a report about an encounter with a large black canine in meadows. The description matched what I'd seen. Massive size, glowing eyes, strange behavior. There were other documents too. Veterinary reports from 1982 analyzing the remains of horse killed in similar attacks. The vets had been confused because the wounds didn't match any known predator. The official conclusion called it likely mountain lion activity, but the evidence didn't support that. Linda explained that the black shuck was real. It was something that had lived in these mountains longer than the park, longer than the rangers, possibly longer than humans had been in Virginia. It appeared in cycles, sometimes years of nothing, then sudden hunting seasons where it would feed for months before vanishing again. The last cycle had ended in 1982. This cycle had started in June 1994, right on schedule. "What is it?" I asked. "I don't know exactly," Linda said. "Something supernatural, something that hunts and kills but exists outside normal rules. Something that uses these mountains as its territory." I wanted to argue. I wanted to insist there had to be a rational explanation. But I'd seen it. I'd felt the wrongness of it. I couldn't deny what my own experience was telling me. The killings got worse. Over the next 2 weeks, the creature moved bolder and faster. More horses died. The kills happened closer to park facilities. One horse was killed less than 200 yards from the ranger station itself. It was testing boundaries, showing us that it could hunt wherever it wanted, whenever it wanted. I started sleeping at the station more often. I'd patrol at night, even though I was terrified. I felt responsible for those horses. They were my responsibility, my job. I couldn't just hide in the ranger station while something hunted them. On June 18th, I did something stupid. I went back to the meadow alone. During the day, in sunlight, trying to find the creature by looking for its lair or den. I found more tracks, more evidence. The pattern showed the creature was using the same routes repeatedly, hunting with intelligence and strategy. When night fell, I was still out there. I'd brought supplies with me: food, water, and salt. The folklore Linda had mentioned talked about using salt against supernatural entities, and I was grasping for anything that might help. Around 10 o'clock, the creature appeared. This time, there was no question about what I was seeing. The light from my lamp, a gas lantern rather than the flashlight that had failed last time, showed the creature clearly. It stood about 50 yards from me, at the edge of the meadow. In that light, I could see it completely. It was 5 feet at the shoulder, maybe 6. Its body was streamlined like a greyhound's, but more powerful, more muscular. Its head held an intelligence in the eyes that was unmistakable. The mouth showed teeth that were too large, too prominent, built for something other than normal predation. This wasn't a dog or a wolf or anything natural. The creature locked eyes with me and started walking forward. My hands moved on instinct. I grabbed the salt I'd brought and scattered it in an arc between myself and the creature. Old folklore, maybe useless, but it was all I had. The creature stopped about 5 feet from the salt line. It stared at the white crystals on the ground, then slowly walked forward and tried to cross. Its front paw touched the salt and it reacted violently, jumping backward like the salt burned. For a moment, I thought the folklore might actually work. Then the creature moved. It backed up about 10 yards, lowered its body like a cat preparing to pounce, and launched itself into the air. It jumped the entire salt barrier in one massive bound. clearing it completely. The salt was worthless. I backed away. The creature advanced. I could see my death happening, could feel the presence of it approaching. The fear was paralyzing. My legs didn't want to obey commands. My mind was spinning in panic. Then I heard gunshots. James Whitmore came running through the darkness, shouting my name. He was another ranger, younger than me, had only been at Grayson Highlands for 3 years. But he was brave, and he'd come when he heard the screams on the station radio. He was firing his service revolver at the creature. The creature turned toward James, losing interest in me for that moment. James kept shooting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 shots. I saw the bullets hit. I saw dark fluid splash from the creature's body where the bullets impacted. The creature was wounded, bleeding something that glowed faintly in the dark. But it didn't run. It charged James. What happened next happened so fast I could barely understand it. James fired his last few rounds, and then the creature was on him. I saw James raise his arms to protect himself, saw him try to step backward. The creature moved like liquid shadow, like darkness given form. It struck him with force that lifted him completely off the ground. James hit a tree 5 feet away, impacted it hard enough to crack the bark. He fell and didn't get up. The creature stood over him for maybe 2 seconds, its massive body blocking my view of James completely. Then it turned away. It looked at me one more time across the darkness, and then it walked backward into the shadows and disappeared. I ran to James. He was bleeding from his mouth and nose. There were massive wounds on his chest and abdomen. Impact trauma so severe I knew immediately he wasn't going to survive. His eyes were open but already losing focus. He tried to say something but only blood came out. I held his hand while he died. It took less than 2 minutes. The official investigation called it an attack by an unknown large predator. An exotic animal probably. Maybe escaped from a private collection somewhere. The bullet wounds from James's revolver confirmed a real physical creature. The wounds on James's body suggested massive teeth and claws. The official conclusion was that some kind of hybrid canine, part dog, part something else, had escaped captivity and was hunting in the park. Nobody said supernatural. Nobody said impossible. I didn't correct them. What would be the point? They put me on mandatory leave, pending psychological evaluation. I wasn't supposed to work for a while. I was considered traumatized from watching my colleague die. They weren't wrong, but I wasn't traumatized the way they thought. I wasn't having panic attacks because of something I didn't understand. I was having them because I understood perfectly. I spent 2 weeks at home, sitting in my living room, barely eating, barely sleeping. James was dead because of me. If I hadn't gone to that meadow, if I hadn't brought the creature's attention to me, if I hadn't been there at all, James would still be alive. The guilt was crushing. Linda came to see me on the 15th day. She brought coffee and sat across from me in my living room like she had all the time in the world. The shuck killed before, she said without preamble. In 1967, when Patterson saw it, there were deaths. A ranger died. A hiker died. Deaths kept happening until it had fed enough. Then it vanished. How long does that take? I asked. 3, 4, 5 months, maybe longer. We don't have enough data, but it follows a pattern. It hunts for a period, then it stops, then it leaves, and then it comes back, I said. 12 to 18 years, usually. It left in late 1982. It came back in June 1994. It'll leave sometime this fall, and it won't return until around 2006 or later. I looked at her. You've seen it. Yes, she said. In 1973. I was newer then, more reckless than you. I thought I could help. It taught me different. How did you survive? I ran. I didn't stop running. It let me go because it had other prey that was easier. Horses. Other humans it could lure into positions where they couldn't escape. Linda leaned forward. The shuck isn't interested in killing everything. It's interested in hunting, in being the top predator. It hunts to prove its dominance. When it's demonstrated that dominance enough times, when it's fed enough, it loses interest. How do we stop it? I asked. You don't. You manage around it. You close the park temporarily. You relocate the horses. You reduce the number of targets. You give it nothing to hunt, and eventually it gets bored and leaves. It sounded insane, but it also sounded like the only plan that made any sense. Over the next 2 weeks, Linda and I developed a strategy. The wild horse herd was relocated to a sanctuary at lower elevation, on protected land miles away from the black shuck's territory. Park trails were closed. Night patrols were canceled. Visitors were turned away with vague explanations about environmental restoration. We essentially abandoned the creature's domain, pulled away all the prey, and waited. For 3 months, June through August, we watched. Rangers monitored the meadows from a distance, tracking the creature's movements through evidence. Kills, sign, areas where the soil had been disturbed or plants had been scorched for no reason. The activity peaked in August. Dead wildlife turned up more frequently. The creature was hunting constantly, feeding, establishing dominance over its territory. Then in September, the activity decreased. The kills became less frequent. In October, they stopped completely. The forest went quiet. The meadows showed no sign of the creature. It was gone. When I returned to active duty, I wasn't the same person who'd left. I'd seen something that fundamentally changed how I understood the world. The mountains weren't just forests and wildlife and natural processes. They were also something older, something that operated by different rules, something that humans had to negotiate with rather than control. I proposed a new safety protocol, named after James Whitmore. The Whitmore Protocol outlined procedures for ranger safety in areas with unknown large predators, emphasizing observer safety over aggressive investigation. I made sure every ranger who worked in those mountains understood that sometimes the best thing to do was retreat, observe from a distance, and respect that some territories belong to predators we didn't fully understand. I continued my work with the wild horses, but differently. I started researching indigenous knowledge about the black shuck and creatures like it. I discovered that Cherokee and Shawnee peoples had rituals designed not to kill such entities but to acknowledge them, sometimes even to make offerings. They understood something that Europeans had forgotten. You don't always fight what's predatory. Sometimes you respect it. You make space for it. You accept that its existence serves a purpose in the larger ecosystem. That was nearly 30 years ago now. I'm 76 years old. I've worked in Grayson Highlands for 4 more decades after that summer of 1994. The black shuck hasn't appeared again. Not yet. But I know it's coming. The cycles are predictable. If it came back in 1994, it should return sometime between 2006 and 2010. I'm prepared for that. We all are. We have protocols. We have understanding. We have acceptance. Because I learned something that summer that has guided every day since. The mountains are predator territory. That's not a problem to solve. That's just reality. We work within those constraints. We manage around the predators, natural and otherwise. The black shuck is part of the Appalachian ecosystem. Some things you don't fight. Some things you survive by understanding, respecting, and knowing when to step aside.